handcuffs 2 years after a helpless baby boy dies. Detectives say the horrific crime committed by James Westervelt involved a baby, months of abuse, a leaf blower, and meth. 2 years. That's how long James Westervelt walked free after a 6-month-old baby stopped breathing in his care. Then deputies showed up with an arrest warrant, and inside it was a detail so disturbing investigators had to describe it second by second. A leaf blower pointed straight at an infant's face. Here's what happened to baby KJ. Kenneth Westervelt, KJ to his family, was 6 months old in the summer of 2024. His mother, Stephanie Johnson, was the kind of parent who barely let him out of arm's reach. James Westervelt was the man acting as his father, a self-described stay-at-home dad who called himself Mr. Mom. Remember that title. By the end of this story, it sounds a lot less like devotion and a lot more like a warning sign. Nobody caught in time. The family lived in Marion County, Florida, tucked between Orlando and Gainesville. On August 12, 2024, Stephanie fed KJ, put him in his bassinet, and stepped out to see a friend. When she came home, her son was limp and cold. She called her mother in a panic. The grandmother ran over, took the baby, and said his eyes were barely open, his skin drained of color. Rushing him toward the house, she says she tripped and fell. Baby still cradled in her arms the whole way down. Johnson and recalled he was unresponsive and limp. The victim's eyes were barely opened and his skin was pale. As she entered the house, she recalled the defendant was on the phone with 911. As she entered the living room area, she recalled tripping on the couch and falling with the victim in her arms. The victim remained in her arms for the entirety of the fall, but recalled his neck. Inside, James Westervelt was already on the phone with 911. KJ was flown to a trauma center in Orlando. For nearly 4 days, he fought in the ICU. On August 16, 2024, he died. On August 16, 2024, baby KJ died after spending nearly 4 days in the ICU. And his father, or the man acting, and that's when this stopped being a tragedy and became a homicide investigation, because the injuries on his small body didn't match the story detectives were hearing. So they sat down with Westervelt, and what followed wasn't one explanation. It was 4, each one arriving right after the last one fell apart. First, he said he'd been in the bathroom 5 minutes, and his 2-year-old had climbed into KJ's bassinet and started poking him. He said he pulled the toddler out, rocked the crying baby, and that it wasn't rough, just quick. Detectives told him that story didn't come close to matching the severity of KJ's injuries. It collapsed immediately. Not that I effing thought it was. It might have, but I don't intentionally think. And later, there's not a time where I think I hurt that baby. That's what I'm saying. If there was any possibility, it was when I was rocking the baby going into the living room. But I did. It wasn't rough. It wasn't. So he offered a second version. This time, an incident 4 days earlier, on August 8th, when KJ supposedly rolled off the master bed while Westervelt made a bottle. He said the baby, then vomited repeatedly for the next 3 days, straight through to the morning before he died. His theory was solid food. But days of unexplained vomiting in an infant isn't what a simple fall produces. It's what internal trauma produces. And in that same conversation, Westervelt admitted he'd been using methamphetamine, only clean, in his words, for 12 days. In the same interview, the detective wrote that James Westervelt told them that he had had problems with methamphetamine, but had been clean since the beginning of the month. At that point, that would have been 12 days. But that claim didn't hold either. Then a witness surfaced. Guess what? Detectives said they interviewed a man who told them he had been in the home days before the 911 call. That man said that he saw James Westervelt go into the bathroom with baby KJ. During that time, baby KJ started crying, and 10 to 15 minutes later, James Westervelt came out, and baby KJ started vomiting. The man told investigators that baby KJ had a bruise on his head. A man who said he'd been in the home days before the 911 call, who watched Westervelt take KJ into the bathroom alone. The baby cried. 10 to 15 minutes later, Westervelt came out, and KJ started vomiting. That man said he saw a bruise on the baby's head that day. And he told detectives something that reframed everything. He believed there was a real chance he was KJ's biological father from an affair with Stephanie while Westervelt was in jail. That man told investigators that he was very likely baby KJ's biological father because he had an affair with the baby's mother while James Westervelt had been. So ask yourself, if Westervelt suspected the baby in his care wasn't his son, does that change anything about how KJ was treated? Stephanie herself said this wasn't the first time she'd seen bruises on her baby. Every time, Westervelt had an answer ready. Confronted with evidence the injuries matched violent shaking, Westervelt reached for a fourth story. He suggested the fatal injury actually happened when the grandmother tripped carrying KJ into the house during the 911 call. Claim 4. Blame shifted onto the one person who ran to save him. But before we get to whether that's even medically possible, there's one more piece of evidence, and it's the reason this case went viral in the first place. Detectives say the mother of the baby found a video on James Westervelt's phone in which he pointed a leaf blower at this little baby to wake him up. When confronted, the mother told detectives that James Westervelt thought that was. While going through Westervelt's phone, Stephanie found a video. She wasn't looking for it. She stumbled onto it, and it made her sick enough to hand it straight to police. It shows Westervelt holding a leaf blower, running, aimed directly at KJ's face, not passing by accident, positioned on purpose, camera angled to capture it. It's funny. When the video begins, the leaf blower is already running. It is pointed purposefully and directly at the victim's face. The camera is positioned to intentionally record the act. The force from the projected air of the leaf blower is forcing the skin around the victim's nose and mouth area backward. The force is so that it causes the victim to slide down the boppy pillow as his hands flail. It is clear the victim is experiencing difficulty in his ability to breathe, if he even had the ability at all to breathe at this point. Investigators wrote that the force of the air is visibly pushing the skin around the baby's nose and mouth backward. KJ is sliding down the pillow beneath him, hands flailing, struggling to breathe. The nozzle tracks his face as he slides. When the video ends, the leaf blower is still running, still aimed at him. It was already on when the recording started. Investigators believe the real event lasted far longer than the 10 seconds caught on camera. When Stephanie confronted him, Westervelt said he thought it was funny, said he was just trying to wake the baby up. The autopsy found KJ died from head trauma, consistent with shaken baby syndrome.
So anytime you have a case like this where you've got a child who was normally responsive and all of a sudden they're weak, they're unresponsive, there's just seemingly some damage to the brain. When you look at the autopsy, you're looking to see, does this baby have hemorrhaging? Does this baby have what looks like shaken baby syndrome, which in detail is really just the brain hitting against the skull?
To understand what that actually requires, and to weigh in on Westervelt's shifting stories, we brought in an outside coroner with zero connection to the case.
Actually, it does. And let me tell you why. Because a newborn, even a child who is less than a year old, their skulls are still very pliable. And what that means is that their skulls are changing as they get older. So when a baby is born, they have the amazing ability to go through the birth canal. And this requires that their skull almost kind of elongate so that they can get through the canal. All babies, when they're born that way, tend to have like a little point on the top of their head, and they tell you to, rub the baby's head and smooth it out. There's also something called a fontanelle, which sits in the top of the baby's head, and there's this kind of soft spot where
causing the kind of brain damage found in this autopsy takes real, sustained force, not a bump or a stumble. On the grandmother's fall, her answer was blunt.
No. Absolutely not. There are some things in the medical community, when you hear them, you think, okay, that's a load of BS, honestly. And in this particular situation, this child was already limp and lifeless almost. And so for him to say that this trip and fall with grandma could have caused this level of injury, I call BS on.
Not possible. By that point, she said, KJ was already limp and unresponsive from earlier trauma. A short trip while cradling a baby doesn't produce catastrophic brain injury. She called the earlier bruises and vomiting a pattern, not a coincidence. The kind of escalation she's seen before in abuse cases, where old injuries sit beside a final fatal one. And on the leaf blower, she didn't hesitate. She called it abuse. Full stop.
Child, there's nothing funny about doing this to an adult. Like, yeah, you may tease around with this. Like, I've been out when the guy who does my yard will be out there blowing the leaves, or my son will be helping, and they'll, kind of aim it in my direction a little bit, but it literally takes your breath away. As an
Right.
adult, where I can move my head and run away, an infant cannot do that. So the fact that he
An adult struggles to tolerate that force for even a few seconds and can turn away. An infant can't move his head, can't escape, can't do anything but take it. She said plainly that if that footage alone had ended KJ's life, she'd have ruled it a homicide without a second thought.
if this child doesn't weigh a lot, children are very top heavy because their heads are heavier. He could have caused serious injury at the time. And I'll tell you, if that child had any injuries related to that leaf blower and he would have died, I would have ruled that death as a homicide. It was an idiotic thing to do.